Hello in this fine frosty day. In this video I'm going to show you how to replace the rear brakes in a Subaru Impreza. I'm going to replace the pads and rotors. It's one of the easier cars I've worked on to do this, and so I would consider it sort of more advanced entry level, moderate difficulty. You don't need a lot of tools. The Subarus have a dual drum disc system. The drum brakes are used for the parking brakes, and the disc portion are used when you're everyday driving. It's very unlikely that you'll have to replace the drum portion. Well, the shoes, I should say. When you replace the rotor, you'll actually be replacing the drum of the brakes as well. So let me show you what tools you're going to need, and we'll get started. All right. Well, you'll need a jack. At least I didn't put that in this display, but you know, ratchet socket with a 12 millimeter, 14 millimeter socket. C-clamp. This will help you compress the caliper to put the new pads on. You need the new pads. I use a little bit of axle grease, and I'll show you why. Anti-seize, especially if you live in a cold, wintry climate like this. I use an impact gun, but you don't need an impact gun. 19 millimeter socket to get the lug nuts off, and a breaker bar. You could use a breaker bar. You're going to need two bolts. These are, I believe, about 10 millimeter. I don't know what pitch they are, and I'll show you when you need that for. And a torque wrench. I always use a torque wrench when putting the wheels back on. I've broken too many wheel studs, and always paranoid about the wheels coming off. And that's pretty much all you need, and we'll get started. Alright, step number one, we get the wheel off. So I got the car supported. Even though it's icy under here, it's on a flat level surface. It's you got to make sure that the parking brake is off. You need to be able, for this to turn, be able to get the pads to get the rotor off. So, you know, while you're under here, always take a look. You know, look at the strut. Here's the sway bars right here. Sway bar link. Here's some of the lower arms, suspension arms, one of the lower control arms, drive shaft. Kind of take a look, see if anything's particularly more rusty than it should be, and that everything looks intact. You know, you don't have a break in the line or anything like that. Now, the first thing we're going to do, if you're not familiar, there's the caliper assembly, which is the caliper, which is this portion right here, and the bracket, which is this portion right here. We need to take the whole thing off so we can remove the rotor. They're just two 14 millimeter bolts, one here and one's down here, and they're fairly easy to get off. You know, the way I do it, one thing I forgot to mention is a mallet. You just, right here, and then I use the mallet to break them loose. Now, I'm not sure if you can see that. Sorry, I was checking the camera to make sure you can see. So I just tap it off just to loosen them up. Find the lower one. Right here. Sorry, try not to obscure the camera view. Cheap impact. So, okay, so I got the bolts off, and sometimes it can be real bare to work these things off. So, you know, you just have to work it off. What happens is a lip forms right here, and you have to get past it. So, get the caliper, kind of lay it on the suspension components. You don't want it to hang by the brake line. So now the caliper's out of the way, and we can begin to remove the rotor. The rotor, and I'm loving Subaru for this. This is where these little 10 millimeter bolts, and in the description I'll probably eventually go down to the hardware store and figure out exactly what size they are so I can mention it, and you can buy them if you don't have bolts laying around. These are just bolts I had off of cars. So basically the idea is that this is going to push it's going to pull the rotor off for you without having to like wrench on it. So you get it taut, you do a couple turns, get this one tight, couple turns, and you work your way back and forth. A couple turns on each one, and I can see the rotor moving off. But it's a real world problem. There you go, off. Now the other one will just slide right on. You can see this is the drum brake system here, and these are the shoes on either side. You can see there's a fair amount of life. Things look pretty good inside. So don't need to touch anything there. I'll just slip the new rotor right on. Another thing I forgot to mention is after you get the new rotors, you're going to want to clean them with some brake cleaner just to get some oil off of them. Now this one is working on a little harder than the other. Oh, you know what? I know why. I have the braking brake on. So, bam, that's on. Now what we're going to do, just bolt this sucker. I'm going to take the pads out of the caliper, and then we're going to bolt the caliper back on, the caliper bracket on, and then we'll take the caliper off secondly. So, so basically, you can get these pads out, knock them out. It'll just be easier to get them onto the new rotor. Like that. Okay, so I pulled the pads off. This is just sitting loosely. I'm going to bolt it back on. So this is where the anti-seize comes into play. So I'm going to put some anti-seize on the bolts, and then that way, if ever I do have to take them back off. So I'll start with the top one. Just find the hole. And now this, in my opinion, is one of the hardest parts, is getting these two holes to line up. And once you get the one, then it's generally easier to get the second one. There we go. And you can kind of see them. And I'll tighten it down just a little bit, but not too much. Just enough to snug it. Alright, so got the bolts in. Usually just give them a little tap to kind of snug them up a bit. You don't need to kill them. Next step, now we're going to take the caliper portion off. I'm going to take it off. You don't actually have to take it completely off. I'll show you real quick what people have done. Oops, this is a 14 millimeter. And I gotta switch. Okay, just get in there with the mallet, just tap a little bit. I'm a fan of the mallet and the tapping. You just can't get leverage sometimes. So let's see. What you can do is just undo the bottom bolt here. You could literally swing the caliper up like this, push the piston back in. You can load the oops, trying to find the brake pads like this. Slide it back down, and tighten everything back up, and you're done. The only thing I do differently is what the caliper does is it slides on these pins that are in here. See, this moves in and out, and the same right here. Those can seize up. I'm going to use a C-clamp here to push the piston back in. So you can see that piston goes back in. When you do this, I always forget to mention things. You have to open up the master cylinder reservoir, and allows the brake fluid to push back into it. So you just take the cap off of it, and you want to check your levels before you do this, otherwise you might overflow. So now the piston's pushed back in. Now I have enough room to slide this thing down over my things, tighten these bolts back up. You're done. But like I was saying, I'm going to slide this up again. I'm going to pull this out, and you just pull on it, and then this is the slider. If you want to check that the grease is still looking pretty good, which it is, this is where the axle grease is for. I might add just a little bit, and you can get it in a tub. I just happen to have mine as in this. Add a little bit. Make sure the thing's really greased up. You actually have the best way to get this rubber thing back in, though, is actually to take it off completely and stick it in manually. Stick it in first here, and then because there you go, it's on, and then you stick this on right here, and you push it down until the rubber bellows goes on the top there, and you actually pull them up a little bit. That way that one's nice and lubricated. And then you see there's a notch here, there's a notch on the side. Those kind of interlock, And that allows you to bolt this thing back together. Here's the bolt. I'm going to put some anti-seize on it. I'm a little religious about this. And put that bolt back on. It allows you to tighten it without this thing spinning. There's a little bit of hair there. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. When you get into the car, so you're pretty much done now. Once I lubricate this other side, I'm done. Tighten these things up, check everything, put the wheel back on, put the lug nuts on, lower the jack, and then you go in and you want to torque all your lug nuts. I usually torque to about 80, 85. You should check on the manual though to make sure if that's the correct torque setting. Get into the car, turn it on, pump the brakes a few times. That'll push the caliper piston back out and make sure that the pads engage the rotor properly. And then take it for a test drive nice and gingerly, and you're good to go. So one of the easier brake jobs I've done. Another thing I would suggest is bleeding the brakes. This is something you're going to want to do with a second person though. Here's the bleeder valve. What you'll do is you'll take this rubber cap off, which is a little bit tight on right now. You'll crack this. You'll take a piece of vacuum line, go into a bottle with a little bit of fluid in it. Maybe I'll do another video separately of how to bleed brakes. And then you'll get some of the old fluid out, which will be like a dark, maybe blackish color. And then you can get rid of some of that, flush out some of the old fluid. I'm not going to do it at this point. Another thing, you can buy something called speed bleeders, which makes it easier, and you can do it by yourself. You don't really need another person to get a good bleed on the brakes with speed bleeders. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Feel free to share it. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to share them in the description below. I'll have a complete tool listing and some other suggestions. Plus I'll have the size of these bolts I use to pull the rotor off in the description as well. If you want to see more, please subscribe, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye.